Welcome to Manager Tools. Politics 101, Chapter 6, Politics Are Just Relationships. Part 4. This cast answers these questions. Should I play politics? How can I get better at office politics? Why does politics have a bad reputation? Well, if you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Here we go.
I'm going to separate our guidance, sort of a bulletized list here, into two categories. Among our own team, if you're a manager, and external to that. And here's something interesting. I was talking to somebody about this. Actually, they didn't know that I was talking about this cast. We were having a discussion about politics. And I alluded to the fact that it's just relationship effects. And it was a 15-minute conversation. They never got it. And that told me that I needed to work on how I was going to communicate this concept. Among our own team doesn't seem to be a place for politics. But obviously, it is a place for relationship effects, right? So the Manager Tools community puts relationships with directs first in terms of the leverage you need to achieve results and retention. The better you know your directs, the greater will be there in your productivity. Also, being more senior to our directs, we need to think about the effect of our decisions and the promulgation of other people's decisions, because remember, managers are communicated through, not to. We need to think about the effect of other people's decisions that we communicate to our directs on our relationships with our team members, okay? So, some guidance. Think about the influence on your team of your own decisions. When you think, wow, this particular decision or action or plan or whatever is going to be really hard on my direct, I'll have to keep that in mind in the weeks ahead. That's a political calculation. It's a relationship effect calculation. Think about whose performance will improve or decline based on a decision you make. Talk about the relationship effects on performance of decisions you make. In other words, I make a decision. Somebody on my team appears to have gotten less of a really good situation than somebody else. Their motivation may be affected. Some people may redouble their efforts and maybe become testy to work with. Some other people may just feel a little less motivated, come in a little later, and so on. Be careful that you see those things as systemic or related rather than, gee, why is he or she acting that way?
Yeah, and think about it when you're making the decision, and then later on, evaluate how effective you were in predicting those kind of effects, right? And get better at it.
And be able to say to one of your directs, now look, I know you didn't get as big a piece of pie as you want. That happens sometimes. You're probably going to call this politics. I'm going to call it an effect on our relationship because I made a decision that affected other people outside of our team. And we exist as part of a chain of human beings where, it takes a village kind of thing. And so therefore, I'm going to consider those people. And we have to have a relationship going forward because in about 6 months, they're going to be really important to us. And so therefore, we're taking 98% of what we could get, and we're giving 2% back to the tax man here so that we can continue to be successful in the future. So be aware of that. And that happens all the time. You're always going to get less. You always want to leave something on the table. You always want to pay a little bit to other parts of the organization because in the long run, your pie will get bigger.
It's amazing to me the number of managers who make decisions who don't think about the effect on relationships, right? The political consequences of their decisions. And even if they think about it, they ignore it. They bury their head in the sand. They don't understand and acknowledge the cost because they're, decisions are choice between two things, and there's benefits and there's cost, and very rarely are there decisions made that have no cost. And relationship cost are one of those factors, right?
Yeah.
And they bury their head in their sand, and then they don't even talk to people about it, like explain their decisions, right? If you know people are going to be negatively impacted or relationships negatively impacted, talk about it.
Yeah. And talk about it not just to mitigate the potential negative impacts, but also to help your people learn the kinds of factors they need to consider when they're making decisions at your level, so that they get smarter than you, so that it happens sooner for them. That's the whole point of listening to casts about executive life or managerial life, maybe, before you become a manager. Don't make the same mistakes somebody else did. Help your team understand. Make the case that what they might call politics, you call collaboration, or put differently, political decisions, or all decisions that may appear to be political in some way are really just the result of relationship effects. Look, guys, ask for input from your team when it's appropriate about relationships that will be affected, because you can't consider relationship effects in a potentially politically sensitive situation if you don't know that relationships exist. So, who's going to be affected internally and externally? Let's consider those things, and let's not shoot for the perfect, bright, logical, rational choice. If a choice that is 2% less effective than that in terms of the pure math of it actually gets us 4 or 5 favors owed us by other parts of the organization, maybe my peer, maybe my boss, maybe a support part of the organization. Maybe we give some credit to somebody else, and the credit appears to be much more significant than what they actually contributed. That happens all the time. That's why a lot of times speeches about where people get awards and so on, and they thank people, you're like, wow, really? Yeah, those things are good. And that person then feels like they owe you. The person who's mentioned, hey, I just want to say, I got to thank so-and-so for thus and such. And so-and-so's political profile is raised. His relationships are strengthened. That's what a political profile is. Consider having additional conversations with those people who are affected by relationship effects in your decisions. Maybe you address their concerns with some mitigation, right? Maybe you just explain your reasoning to them individually, acknowledging their issues, which they might not want to talk about in front of everybody else. And, go further. Encourage team members who benefit relationship-wise, politically-wise, from a decision you make to consider the disparate impact of your decision on other people on the team. What's a really specific example of this? One person gets promoted and another person doesn't. So now you got to take the person aside who got promoted and tell her, okay, now somebody did not win. How are you going to handle this?
Right.
Oh, I probably better stay away from for a couple of days. Oh, dear God, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. Then you look like you already made yourself more aloof.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That worked well.
Too good for me. Yeah. A day later, your old buddy comes by and says, too good for me now, huh?
Exactly.
How many movie scenes end with the person telling the other person who's walking away, but I was just trying, yeah. Now, what about external to your team? Look, we have extensive guidance, guys, about politics and building relationships. And at the end of this cast, we're going to do something a little bit different. For those of you who don't know, when Mike and I talk about show notes, and in fact, Mike, this is something that Trevor and I talked about that we may have a problem with this. What we call show notes, other people don't have. Show notes in most podcasts are just basically a series of time hacks, 321, 518, 629, that have a one-sentence description of what was happening in the podcast. And those time hacks are topic changes in the podcast. And it's typically half a page, quarter page, maybe 1 page long. That's not our show notes. Our show notes for this podcast are, I think, 20 pages long. Everything we're saying in this podcast, other than maybe the humorous asides, Game of Thrones is not in the show notes. Everything else in this podcast is available in the show notes. And to be fair, Trevor's not in them, right? Because I wrote these before his lunch. We have basically a 20-page white paper to support this show. And at the back of our show notes that support every one of our podcasts is something called mentions. And it has a list in the show notes of every cast that we mention or that has relevance to the topic at hand. In this particular cast, guys, I'm going to go ahead and mention all of those casts separately at the end of the cast. So I encourage you to stay with us. And if you're not driving, scribble down some things, or maybe turn on your recorder and just record what I say. If you're a licensee, and I want to make a pitch here for that, if you're a licensee of our work, the show notes are part of your license. The podcast will always be free, but if you want a written document that you keep and refer to and read in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, in this case, maybe 20 minutes, rather than having to listen to me blather on for a while, you can read it much easier, and you can download them, and they're yours to keep.
Right. And you get them, you become a member tomorrow, you get access to all the show notes for the last 13 years.
Yeah, wait, Mike, just to be clear, not if they're a member, but if they're a licensee.
If they're a licensee, right. I'm sorry. Yeah. We should share the picture we have of all the show notes printed out. It's
stacked up on my desk.
It's a large stack. It doesn't go to the moon, but it's pretty tall.
It's fairly encyclopedic when you think about management. So this is my periodic appeal, guys. If you're listening right now and you have no connection with us other than listening, you've downloaded on your iPod or you downloaded on a podcatcher of some sort, great. We want you to benefit from our work. And we'd also like you to give back. Come to the website and sign up so that we can communicate with you. We're not going to bombard you with a lot of emails. We don't do that. Ask the person who referred you to us, who's probably a member, meaning we have her email address, or more importantly, a licensee. We do public conferences. We do corporate client work, and we also sell licenses. And part of the reason to provide licenses, I think the price, Mike, is still $200 a year. Is that right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason we do that is we're reaching individual managers. That's the way Manager Tools was started, to help individual managers, whether your company could afford us or not, whether you could afford a management consultant or a management trainer in your back pocket to teach you what you needed to know as you go through your career and hopefully increasing levels of responsibility. It was designed to reach managers, not organizations. We've since done a great deal of work for organizations and will continue to do so. But part of the income we make from licensing goes to support the podcast being kept free and the amount of work we do. We've been doing this for 13 years. We've got we're close to 2 million. I think we've had months with 2 million downloads a month. We're listened to all over the world. And somewhere in the world right now, there is a manager who can't afford a dime for his or her own development. And even in a 1 or 2 or 2 or 5 or 10 person organization, their company will never teach them management. And there's probably no book, I hate to say this way, and I'm sorry, I don't mean it to sound the way it does, other than mine, that teaches them specific things they can do so that when they read the book, they know what to do rather than having to guess, to help them be a better manager. And Mike and I believe, as we believe for many, many years, our friendship goes back 40 years, that we believe if every manager achieved his or her true productivity, we could wipe out hunger in the world, because the amount of productivity that would exist would create so many goods and services and the ability to provide more food and clothing and shelter to everybody. It's not a popular view. I don't mean to say it's unpopular. It's just not that many people believe it, but we do. And you can help by becoming a member and letting us talk to you about maybe the things you need, and also becoming a licensee. So come to the website and please sign up. And I mentioned that, of course, because of the list of mentions. So I'm going to go through a series of recommendations here. Those of you who are longtime listeners will hear references to Cass that we'll go back through at the end of the show. Our most important Career Tools podcast on this is Building Your Network. It's probably the most important Career Tools cast of all. And it doesn't take a lot to do that. It says Building Your Network. It doesn't say playing politics, and it doesn't say networking, which has a bit of a sleazy tone. And I typically agree that that's a little bit, even if I don't think it's sleazy, there are people who are listening to me right now who says, nah, I'm not going to go network. I'm not going to do it. On the other hand, building your network, or putting it differently, creating more relationships in your life, that's a good thing. You'll live longer. And really, it's easy. It doesn't take anything more than creating a relationship, saying hello, shaking hands, introducing yourself to one another, and staying in touch. And that's a reminder. Heck, that's a technological task. Control-Shift-K, Control-G. There you go.
That's Microsoft Outlook, folks, if those of you don't know, and probably don't, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so guidance for external relationships. And by that, external outside the team. Staying in touch gives you the opportunity to do favors for other people, which is one of the key currencies of relationships. I know that really is hard for people to stomach, but that's the way the world works, folks. Know who your boss's friends and enemies are. Avoid favors for her enemies when possible. Do favors for those whose relationships she values. Build relationships widely in your organization, outside of your own area, directorate, division. And by widely, I don't just mean like an arrow to the top. Measure your relationships in the organizations. Know whom you know and where they are and what does that map look like. It's not that hard. You could picture it in your head.
And more importantly, where they are not.
Yes, exactly.
Where you need to focus.
Yeah. Stay in touch with them to know what's happening in their area. Nothing harder than just having a note come up every once in a while in your task. Stay in touch with so-and-so. Introduce yourself to people whom you don't know at meetings you attend. That's part of the value, part of the relationship effect value, part of the political value of meetings. Our first podcast ever, Solution to a Stalled Technical Career, included the example of our very dear friend going into a meeting and not shaking hands and not connecting with other people. By the way, I've never said it. Our dear friend whom that cast was about changed his behavior. And now he's a master. He's still naturally a high C, but he is a master at friendly, pleasant relationship building. He's got a smile on his face. He's got a warm belief in his heart that you're a good person, and he's going to want to say hello to you and stay in touch with you. And he's willing to do favors for other people.
I didn't even think about this until just now, even though we've been talking about politics and relationships for a while. But I had a friend over last night that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I was sitting there with my new wife and her children, my stepchildren now. And I sat down and we were talking. I said, okay, let me tell you about this person. And I pulled out my iPhone and I went to my contacts and I looked up his name. I said, okay, his wife's name is Anna. He has 2 children. Here are their ages. Here's what their names are. And I had them practice and memorize everybody's name. So when they showed up, they would feel welcome, right? And my son goes, it's like, oh my God, you're such a salesman. I said, no, I'm not. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not a salesman. But dude, relationships matter. People's names matter. And when you show up, they're going to feel immediately welcome.
Yeah.
And he got it.
They're not only just going to feel immediately welcome, they're going to like you because they know you made them feel welcome.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to go through life with more people liking you? And I know there's still a hardcore audience out there, a couple of % that are saying, it doesn't matter whether they like me, all that matters is how effective I am. Yeah, see how effective you are later in your career, buddy.
Yeah, or they're thinking that, man, that dude, Mike is weird. His friends come over, he gets his family together and they have like a meeting to describe the operations of the friendly dinner. Yeah. In the same way regarding teams, create and maintain relationships with those people with whom you serve on cross-functional teams. We're another important socialization mechanisms in organizations that we've sort of lost because, we'll just text or email and we don't need to stay in touch with those people. And that's a distraction from our primary goal, which is getting promoted. Don't be so focused on creating relationships with more senior people whose time is harder to get, and then therefore mistakenly sending a message that's what's important to you is other people's organizational power. Don't be a brown noser. Learn how to introduce yourself to other people and how to introduce others to those whom you know. Yeah, help other people make connections, right?
Yeah. Share your relationships with others who can benefit from them. And before I wrap up, Mike, why don't I mention some of the podcasts here? Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to mention this right from the mention section of the podcast. Show notes. Building a Network came out in 2006. Politics 101, Chapter 1, Count Your Votes. Politics 101, Chapter 2, Meeting Prep, Who Wants What? Boy, is that a good one. Politics 101, Chapter 3, The Myth of the Just World, one of my all-time favorites. These ought to be sold as a companion pair. The idea that the world is rational, logical, linear, factual, and just is ludicrous. Politics 101, Chapter 4, Know Thine Enemies. Chapter 5, Politics 101, Chapter 5, Favors Matter. Political Errors, Chapter 1, Oversharing. Political Errors, Chapter 2, Snubbing an Ally. Politics, Have Nothing Bad to Say. You know the phrase, I've got nothing bad to say about that guy. What that means is, yeah, I'm not going to say it. But
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Mentoring with Political Smarts. These are all podcasts, guys. You can go to our all podcast page on the website, type in politics, and then you can just page through or go through all of the different titles that have politics in them. Getting ready to get promoted, politics. The pinch crunch relationship model, another favorite of mine. I learned that 25 years ago. The favor economy, relationship errors, having a deficit, having a favor deficit, relationship errors, giving too many favors, introducing yourself, how to introduce people, intercompany training, network building, developing internal relationships, the when and how, developing internal relationships, the where. Those two together, I really like them. They're about internal networks and organizations. Measuring relationships, relationship diversity, the rule of 50, staying in touch. And I just got an email yesterday about this, about a manager who taught his subordinate about this next cast. And he shared with us the email he got from her about how great this worked. And that is how to pre-wire a meeting. Longtime listeners will say, oh, pre-wire. Oh my gosh. Internal team pre-wires. Negotiation, Chapter 1. It's all about relationships. Or folks, put differently, it's all about politics. Negotiation, Chapter 2. Leave something on the table. Negotiation, Chapter 3. Tough on issues, but nice on people, guys. Negotiation, Chapter 4. Easy on people. There you go. I'd forgotten they were twinned. Negotiation, Chapter 5. Preparation illustrated. Asymmetric negotiation. You want X, I want toothpaste. Disagreeing with your boss. Ethics. Welcome to they, professional subordination. Chapter 2. Introducing managerial change. Brief before you change. Change briefings preparation rule number 1, individuals, not arguments. Leading change, the org cart, Chapter 1. Leading change, model and measure. And change leadership, what's my visual? I asked Wendy to go through and get all the casts that had political themes in them. I know that's a lot, folks. I know it's a lot. But that's to help point out to those maybe newer people that wouldn't have listened to those and didn't know, because we hear all the time, you have too many podcasts. I can't find what I want. And we're working on solving that problem. That's part of the reason we have Map of the Universe. If you don't know what Map of the Universe is, I encourage you to go look at it on the website. There's a little logo for it. Looks like sort of a solar system on the right of the homepage. It will map out every single one of our podcasts in categorized and sub category area. And there's one called politics, and there's one called relationships as well. So to sum up all this stuff, I'm going to say this. You say politics, I say relationships. The stronger your relationships, the less you have to play politics. Build your relationships within your team and without. I'm going to leave it with this. Do the logical thing. Consider politics when you make a decision.
All right, my friend. I enjoyed it, man. There's a lot here.
That was fun. And folks, if you're wondering, I say all the time that I've got 3,000 more casts to write. And I great joy writing them and sharing them with you all, and the fact that you're benefiting and not making the stupid mistakes that Mike and I and our friends did. But I couldn't have written this cast 13 years ago. I knew the basic outlines of it, but I couldn't have written it because I couldn't have put all this together. I would have had to write a book and include all those other politics. And for those of you who have been with us for a long time and you've heard those other casts, I hope this cast ties them together in a nice way and gives you new ways to go back and think about what is a hugely important part of your organizational life, and that's politics or relationship effects.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next week.
So long.